Chapter 10 of The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Gray Phantom by Herman Landon. Chapter 10. A Shot. At noon of the same day, a scene equally tense, but of quite a different character, was being enacted in the library of W. Rufus Fairspeckle. Dazedly, the Gray Phantom set the telephone down. In tones too low for the older man to catch, he mumblingly repeated the startling message that had just come to him over the wire. "Mr. Shea speaking. If you value Miss Hardwick's life, I would advise you to abandon your present plans." One by one, and in the order in which they had been spoken, the words trickled into his benumbed consciousness. He had heard Mr. Shea's voice over the wire. He had been mistaken, then, and the shrunken and wizened man, seated before him with eyes staring and mouth agape, could not be Mr. Shea. Even the evidence of the typewritten slips lying on the desk seemed to mean nothing but the fact that the notorious rogue had just communicated with him by telephone. "What's the matter?" stammered Mr. Fairspeckle, who, not having the faintest inkling as to the nature of the message received by the phantom, was at a loss to understand the latter's demeanor. "Anything wrong?" The phantom scarcely heard him. The significance of the last part of Mr. Shea's message came to him in a flash. In a twinkling his mind was functioning again. His eyes were threatening, like miniature thunderclouds. A new and dynamic impulse seemed to dominate his whole being. He snatched up the telephone directory and found a number. Then he fairly hurled himself at the telephone, frantically jigged the hook up and down, shouted a number into the transmitter, and waited breathlessly till the connection was established. A woman's voice, evidently that of a servant, answered. Miss Hardwick was not in, she explained, and when pressed for further information, admitted that she had not been seen since breakfast the previous day. Mr. Hardwick, ill at ease because of his daughter's absence, was instituting inquiries for her in various directions, and the servant did not know where he could be reached. The phantom's eyes blazed as he set the instrument down with a slam. Mr. Fairspeckle, a flabbergasted look in his bulging eyes, seemed utterly at a loss to comprehend what was going on. For a moment the phantom eyed him narrowly, then cast a bewildered glance at the typewritten slips, and finally turned abruptly on his heels and dashed from the room. No one interrupted him. He suspected that Haiuta was lurking somewhere in the background, but he saw nothing of the sly-footed servant as he rushed from the apartment and, forgetting the existence of the elevator, scurried down 3 flights of stairs. The ferret-eyed individual whom he had seen from the window was still standing at the opposite curb, but he did not deign a single glance in the phantom's direction. Block after block, spurred on by a medley of anguishing doubts and suspicions, the phantom continued his heedless progress, conscious only of the one agonizing thought that something had happened to Helen Hardwick. Presently he awoke to a realization of the futility and recklessness of his conduct. His fears for Helen Hardwick had blunted his wits and stultified his reason, making him forget his old-time caution and nimbleness of mind. To no purpose he was rushing blindly into a net of dangers. With a mutter of disgust at his childish impetuosity, he drew in his steps and turned into a convenient doorway. A glance up and down the street assured him that, thanks to luck alone, his headlong course seemed to have attracted no attention. He scanned the crowd on all sides, but there was no sign of either espionage or pursuit. He had vaguely expected to be followed by the keen-eyed watcher he had seen on the sidewalk outside the Whipple Hotel. But the man was nowhere in sight. For the present, at least, the phantom was safe. Now he must think clearly and act coolly. He could not rid himself of the suspicion that Helen's volatile nature and venturesome disposition had led her into some fearful predicament. He knew she had an infinite capacity for handling difficult situations, but the knowledge gave him scant comfort. He revolved the problem of her disappearance in his mind. She had been missing for more than 24 hours. He sensed a dim significance in the fact that she had passed out of sight the morning following the tragedy at the Thelma Theatre, and of a sudden he asked himself whether there could be any possible connection between her disappearance and the death of Virginia Darrow. Several circumstances lent plausibility to the theory. Chief among them was the mysterious warning the phantom had received from Mr. Shea, the man who was generally believed to have been implicated in Miss Darrow's death. The phantom's mind was working swiftly now, leaping barriers and rushing straight to conclusions. It was Helen's play, he remembered, that had been produced on the night of the tragedy, and it was very probable that she had been present at the premiere performance. Knowing her as he did, he thought it conceivable that she had come into possession of some vital facts bearing on the tragedy. Her inquisitive mind, though untainted by vulgar curiosity, was always dipping into mysteries of one sort or another, and it was possible that on this occasion her natural bent had led her into conflict with Mr. Shea. Almost before he realized what he was doing, the phantom was in a taxicab, shouting to the chauffeur to drive him to the Thelma Theatre. It seemed the logical starting point in his search. At least, he did not know where else to begin, and by visiting the scene of Miss Darrow's death, he might be able to pick up some clue to Helen's movements. The doors were open, and he thought this somewhat strange in view of the fact that a poster on the outer wall announced that the performances of His Soul's Master had been discontinued, but the circumstance did not linger long in his mind. The box office and lobby being empty, he passed unchallenged into the auditorium. For a few moments, while his eyes grew accustomed to the dark, he stood just inside the door, trying to call back to mind each detail of the tragedy as it had been narrated in the newspapers, and presently there came to him a conviction that he was not alone, but that someone was watching him intently. He could not account for the impression, for no sound reached his ears, and the interior was only a mass of gently undulating shadows in which he saw no indication of another's presence. The atmosphere was somewhat oppressive, and a multitude of faint scents lingered in the air, hinting that the theatre had not been ventilated since the last performance. Glancing sharply into the gloom about him, the phantom groped his way down the center aisle, then explored the passageways at each side of the house, and finally looked into each of the boxes. His search availed him nothing, and at length he was forced to admit that his imagination had tricked him. Walking to the rear of the house, he stood with his back against a pillar and gazed toward the last row of seats to the left. It was there, according to the diagram he had seen in one of the papers, that Virginia Darrow had sat when seized with a strange fit of laughter. Again he wondered what bearing the woman's death might have on Mr. Shea's latest venture. The connection, if there was one, seemed so remote that he came to the conclusion that Mr. Shea must be at work on a very intricate and deep-laid scheme. Then it occurred to him that his speculations, founded on insufficient facts, were a waste of time. They were not helping him to solve the mystery of Helen Hardwick's disappearance. As was his habit when he wished to concentrate his mind on a problem, he took a cigarette from his case, then struck a match against the side of his shoe. Absently he held the fluttering light to the tip of the cigarette and inhaled. Suddenly he sprang aside, for a sound, all but too faint for his ears to detect, had warned him of danger, and in the same instant a sharp crack and a flash of fire leaped out of the darkness. Then an object whizzed past his head and with a thudding sound embedded itself in the pillar against which he had been leaning. In a moment he had extinguished his cigarette. He could see now that its glowing point, together with the match, had made him a target for the person who had fired the shot. The bullet had passed so close to his head that, but for his quick and agile backward spring, it would undoubtedly have killed him. His narrow escape had an exhilarating effect, and he dashed toward the point where he had seen the flash of fire, determined to capture the would-be murderer. It was his impression that the shot had been fired only a dozen feet away, and he did not think the man could have escaped. In the gloom he could not distinguish objects clearly, and he dashed headlong against a post. The compact sent a stinging sensation through his head, and in the same moment a figure glided silently past him, and was swallowed by the shadows at the other side of the house. Again the phantom rushed forward. A swiftly moving object, a shade darker than the surrounding dusk, was discernible down the aisle leading to the boxes at the right. The phantom darted after it, but when he reached the point his quarry had disappeared. For an instant he stopped, uncertain which way to turn, and in the midst of his perplexity the varicolored lights along the walls were flashed on. The phantom whirled around. Near one of the exits in the rear of the house stood a tall, slenderly proportioned man. His long, glossy hair was rumpled, and even at a distance the phantom could see that his features, so regularly molded as to give an impression of effeminacy, were intensely pale. He approached swiftly. The two men eyed each other intently before either spoke. "You are Mr. Starr, I believe?" began the phantom, recognizing the other from photographs he had seen in the newspapers. Starr nodded. His right hand was clutching a revolver. Coming closer, the phantom noticed that his nose was discolored and swollen, probably the result of the attack that had preceded the disappearance of Virginia Darrow's body. "I owe you an apology for intruding like this," he went on, "but the formalities can wait. There was a shot fired here a few moments ago, and I believe it was meant for me." "I was at work in my office upstairs when I heard something that sounded like a revolver shot," explained Starr. "I armed myself and came down to investigate." His voice, at other times perfectly modulated, was a little husky, and he seemed unduly conscious of his disfigured nose. He maintained a tight grip on his pistol while regarding the phantom with a look of suspicion. "We ought to search the house at once," suggested the phantom. "The scoundrel can't have gone far." Starr readily acquiesced, but from time to time while they went on with the search, the phantom felt the other's stealthy gaze searching his face, and each time he saw a look of dawning recognition in Starr's eyes. He thought nothing of it, for the capture of the man who had fired the shot seemed of far greater importance. Deep in his mind was a faint and remote hope that the fellow, if caught, might be persuaded to tell something of what had happened to Helen Hardwick. They searched every conceivable space in the auditorium, back of the stage, and finally in the storerooms and dressing rooms down below, but without avail. As they abandoned their quest, the phantom thought he saw signs of increasing nervousness on Starr's part. "Strange how the scoundrel disappeared," he remarked when once more they stood in the back of the auditorium. No stranger than what happened here night before last." Starr spoke with a touch of petulance in his voice and manner. "Mr. Shea and his henchmen seem to have a knack of walking through solid walls. What I object to most is his evident determination to make my theater the scene of his diabolical activities. By the way," and he fixed the phantom with a look of mingled perplexity and suspicion, "haven't you and I met before?" "Not in person, unless I am mistaken." The phantom, alert against the slightest threatening move on the other's part, smiled faintly. "The newspapers have been kind enough to give me some publicity from time to time, and you may have seen my photograph. Suppose we let it go at that." "As you wish, of course," murmured Starr, his lips twitching. "But we shall be able to talk to better advantage if we first complete the introductions. I was almost certain I recognized you at first glance. You are the Gray Phantom. But don't get startled," he quickly added as the phantom suddenly stiffened. "My interest in life is purely aesthetic. I am trying, in my small and humble way, to uplift the drama from the sordid depths into which it has fallen through the stupidity and avarice of managers. The capture and punishment of criminals interest me not at all. To be perfectly frank with you, as between the police and a fascinating rogue like yourself, my sympathies are with the latter." He made an expressive gesture, and the phantom watched with interest the slight, quick and marvelously impressive motions of his hands. Though this was his first meeting with the man himself, the gestures, as well as the characteristic backward toss of the head, seemed oddly familiar. "I think you are mistaken about one thing," Starr went on, his nervousness returning. "Is there any reason why anyone should wish to put you out of the way?" "None that I know of," replied the phantom thoughtfully. "I suppose I have enemies, but it didn't occur to me that anyone was after my life until that shot was fired." "And weren't you a bit precipitate in jumping at the conclusion that the bullet was intended for you? Suppose you give me the details." The phantom told him the meager facts of the firing of the shot. "There you are!" exclaimed Starr when he had finished. "The fellow couldn't see your face. All he saw was the match, and he used that as a target, knowing you were holding it directly in front of your face while lighting the cigarette." He took a few quick, nervous steps back and forth. He clenched and unclenched his hands as if trying to quell a rising trepidation. Suddenly he paused directly in front of the phantom. "That bullet was not intended for you, but for me," he declared emphatically. "Are you sure?" "Not sure, but I have the best of reasons for supposing that such is the fact. I have had several intimations of danger in the past few weeks. But it isn't necessary to go into details. Since night before last, I have wondered what prompted Miss Darrow to send me the facetiously worded note hinting that Mr. Shea was in the house. If she were alive, I am sure she could tell us several interesting things about— But what's the good of supposing? Miss Darrow will never be able to tell what was in her mind when she wrote me that note. Only one thing is certain. She was killed because she had, in some unexplained manner, learned Mr. Shea's identity." The phantom regarded him narrowly. "Some people think to be of the opinion that I am Mr. Shea." "Rot. The similarity between your tactics and those of Mr. Shea is only superficial. The essential difference ought to be plain even to a stupid headquarters detective. Besides, you never took life, but the idea is too absurd to waste breath on. Let us be practical. You have not yet explained why you are honoring the Thelma Theater with this visit. The phantom was about to reply when one of the doors in front was pushed open and the shadow of a masculine figure fell across the floor. After a glance into the face of the newcomer, the phantom sensed danger and tried to retreat into a corner where the dim light held out a faint hope of brief security. But it was too late. "Stay right where you are," commanded the man who had just entered. "Didn't know the gray phantom was back in town. Step out here where I can look at you." End of chapter 10. Recording by Roger Moline.